Hi, Ed here from keywordspeopleuse.com, and I've got an exclusive time-limited offer for you. If you book a product demo with Keywords People Use, I'll give you a free 7-day trial of our standard plan, which allows you access to our new content optimization tool. This tool hooks into your Google Search Console data so we can find all the keywords you're ranking for and what pages are ranking. We then crawl your site content and use advanced machine learning techniques like embeddings and cosine similarity to find you content optimization opportunities that will quickly boost your impressions and clicks from Google. This new feature in Keywords People Use is already showing results for people using it. Don't miss out on the opportunity of a 7-day free trial. Just go to keywordspeopleuse.com/demo to book your slot. That's keywordspeopleuse.com/demo. You'll find the link in the show notes of this episode. Hello and welcome to SEO is Not That Hard. I'm your host, Edd Dawson, the founder of the SEO intelligence platform keywordspeopleuse.com, where we help you discover the questions people ask online and then how to optimize your content to build traffic and authority. I've been in SEO and online marketing for over 20 years, and I'm here to share the wealth of knowledge, hints and tips I've amassed over that time. Hello, welcome back to SEO is Not That Hard. It's me here, Edd Dawson, as usual, and today I'm sharing with you a podcast I was a guest on just the other week. And this is the Podcasting Amplified podcast, and it's basically it's a podcast that is for podcasters. But before you think, what's that got to do with SEO? We actually talk quite a lot about SEO within it, the kind of things where SEO can help with podcasts, but it's also general around SEO as well, because most podcasters have websites and that kind of thing as well. It also talks about how I came to launch the podcast and the kind of journey I've had with podcasting, which you might find interesting itself. I've been thinking about doing an episode like that anyway, so this kind of like kills two birds with one stone there, so hopefully you'll find it useful. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the podcast. And yeah, without further ado, it's over to Joe's podcast, and away we go.
Could you release 3 episodes of your podcast every single week consistently and keep them bingeable, searchable, and standing out from the competition? Well, this is exactly what Edd Dawson did with his podcast, SEO is Not That Hard. After spending many years in the SEO space, Edd has consistently produced 3 of these bite-sized, bingeable episodes every single week for years. And in this episode, he shares his SEO expertise, how to find out what your listeners are searching for, and how he's managed to consistently produce these bingeable episodes so you too can make your podcast bingeable and create episodes you know people want to listen to. In this episode, we cover how Edd has consistently released 3 episodes since day one, how to stand out from your competition with a podcast, tips on how to come up with podcast episode ideas, the essentials of getting your content to rank on Google, how to find out what questions your listeners want answered, how Edd built a pro-sounding podcast setup for under $200, and much more. So whether you want to get started with podcast SEO or you want tips on how to create a bingeable podcast that everyone wants to listen to, then keep listening. You're listening to Podcasting Amplified, where our mission is to help you to leverage the power of podcasting to amplify your message and achieve your goals. If you're a podcaster and you want to learn from the journeys of other passionate podcasters, you're in the right place. Edd Dawson, thanks for joining me on Podcasting Amplified. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on. Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So Edd hosts the podcast SEO is Not That Hard. And he's a seasoned expert with over 20 years of experience in building successfully ranking websites. And on his podcast, which he produces 3 episodes a week for, he shares actionable tips, strategies, and insights to help you improve your Google rankings and create better websites for your users. So before we dive in and I start asking you questions about SEO, for the listeners, if anyone's not 100% sure what SEO is and why they should care as podcasters or as business owners, can you give us a brief overview of SEO, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, SEO, first of all, it stands for search engine optimization. And the whole idea is basically doing what you need to do to get your website to rank better in Google, to get better visibility, to get more clicks, to get more visitors, to get more engagement. The SEO kind of morphs beyond that in many respects. People now, it's all about user experience, getting people to take the actions you want on the page. So it sort of morphs from just purely ranking in search engines to also making sure that people get the best experience on site, because that's important, again, to your search rankings in the bigger scheme of things. But yeah, essentially it's just trying to make sure that you get your site ranking well, getting visitors in the search engines, mainly Google it used to be, but now things are moving a little bit. People are talking about how we can rank in things like ChatGPT and the other search avenues that are now coming in strong. So it's not just Google nowadays, it's wider than that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. I hadn't thought of ranking it. I know people have talk about ranking in other search engines like YouTube and Bing and stuff, but ranking for ChatGPT, I guess that's something that you're kind of maybe looking into at the moment. I know things have sort of moved fast in that area. Is that something that's keeping you on your toes, the AI stuff?
Yeah, for most of the past 20 years, it's just been Google, Google, Google. When we talked about search engines, we really just talked about Google, especially in the UK. I know it's a little bit broader in some other areas of the world, but for most of the world, it just was Google. But now with ChatGPT and other large language models like that, other AI systems like that, we are now starting to see just the first few drips of traffic coming through from them, and how ChatGPT, especially when they launched SearchGPT just a few months ago, they can actively search the web and make recommendations and cite that they are pushing people to now, reference sites. And we're starting to see it come through. It's still very early days though. I mean, from probably 99% of people out there using the web and searching are still using Google, but it's the biggest shift I've ever seen, and the more experienced sort of power users online are using ChatGPT more and more. I mean, I am certainly myself, and I'm seeing that happen more and more. So I think it's going to become more prevalent and probably accelerate over this year and the coming years.
Maybe we can touch on AI again a little bit later on. I just wanted to first talk to you about the podcast. So you've been in this business for a long time, and you have done a lot of other things before you ran keywordspeopleuse.com. Why did you choose to start a podcast when you did? It's getting on for about a year and a half now, isn't it?
Yeah.
What was the main driver, and how has it affected your business?
First of all, I've been an avid podcast listener 10 years or more, probably at very early days. I'm very, very keen on podcasts because for many years, all our businesses we've always had since 2007 as virtual businesses working from home. So I've essentially worked by myself, even though I've had employees and other team members. Everyone's always worked virtual, so that means a lot of time being by myself. And I quite enjoy having something to listen to while I'm working or while I'm doing chores or anything like that. So I've been a real big podcast listener for many years, and I've always got loads of value out of it. I'd never had the desire to go out there and push myself as like a personal brand, because prior to sort of 2021, all our sites were just purely consumer facing, and we were driving all our traffic from SEO. I sold our biggest site, broadband.co.uk, in 2021, which obviously left me with a position where, what am I going to do next? And for all these many years, I've been listening to people online and on podcasts talking about SEO. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about SEO. I call it a confusopoly, a lot of the SEO industry, where people make money by making it confusing so that they need experts to come and help them. In some cases, some big companies, some enterprise level stuff, then yeah, I can see they have issues that they need experts to deal with. But for many people, they could just do it themselves, but it's really hard to get into. So we founded Keywords People Use to sort of work on the philosophy that I'd always worked upon for ranking traffic, which is, I won't go into it now, but it's basically around answering people's questions and not getting too in the weeds on analytics and keywords and all those things, but it's taking a simpler way of doing it. And I wanted to make that accessible to people who could use it for themselves. As an SEO tool, you are competing against other SEO tools which are being run by other very experienced SEOs. So it's like an incredibly difficult area to stand out in, because you're working against the very best experts in the world on these things. And a lot of them have got history going back years and years and years on their tools. So it's like, how was I going to differentiate myself? How was I going to get our tool noticed and also give it credibility? So that meant putting myself out there and putting my story out there and helping people, trying to position myself as, hey, I've got some expertise here. I'm going to share it with you. And I felt that the best way to do it was with a podcast, because with a podcast, it's so much more authentic. If people can hear my voice and hear my story, then I can give them tips and advice and help, then it's a lot less stale than just putting it on the page. Because I knew if I was going to go with just our site, just a blog, it was going to be a lot harder to cut through the noise, because there's a barrier entry to podcasting, which is having the balls to get up and do it, basically, and the guts. I'm not a natural public speaker. I've never stood on a stage and talked in front of people. And so to do this in the first instance was a case of, right, if I can get over that barrier and just try it, then I'm kind of reducing the pool of people that I'm competing against. And I also knew that the audience I was looking for were those that were really serious about SEO, or serious about wanting to learn SEO. And I wanted to try and help demystify it for them. So I just thought a podcast was a worthwhile, at least a trial. I initially thought I'll just try this. I thought I'll do 20 episodes and see before I even look at any analytics and see if I get any feedback. And within that period, we did start to get feedback. We did start to get listens, and it did start to pick up customers because people would listen to the podcast. And I don't try and push the software that we're selling in the podcast, other than in the intro, it's sponsored by. And if it's relevant, I'll mention it, but only as a relevancy. I try and keep it as non-promotional as possible and try to give value. And then hopefully if I give enough value, then people will, out of curiosity, go and look at what it is that was behind us, basically.
So you have some examples of where you know that a customer's found you through the podcast, have you? Or is it more just kind of a sort of brand awareness?
Yeah. Because on the there's two ways we know. One is when people sign up for the tool, they go through an onboarding process, and one of the places is, how did you hear of us? And we've got the podcast as an option. Well, it doesn't say my podcast, but podcasts. Or podcasts.
Yeah, so
sometimes when I've been a guest, they might have heard from me. There's a call to action on the podcast with a dynamic ad. We've got you can schedule a demo. So if you want to schedule a demo with me, follow this link. It's a Calendly link. So I know that if anyone's clicked that link and come to that Calendly thing, they've scheduled it from the podcast, so I can pick up there when people are scheduling. And we do get people through that. And I get emails from people who have signed up and said, oh, love the podcast. I've signed up for the tool, and they'll actually contact us. So we know that it works. And the conversion rate compared to a website is probably really, really actually good compared to the number of listeners we have, the number of people that have signed up. It's a really good rate, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, that's a couple of ideas for if anyone's listening does have something that they're selling, a call to action. They can use trackable links in their show notes, or like you say, you can have a where did you find us option so that people can choose. Mm-hmm. So do you know if any of your competitors, any of the other tools have a podcast, or are you kind of the first SEO podcast that is actually promoting a tool like this?
Oh, there's definitely others doing it. I've not seen one doing the exact format that I've done, which is, until very recently, it's just been me talking, the short podcast, just me. There are others that do sort of interview podcasts, and there's others that have done series of shorter series of podcasts. I think obviously a lot of the other bigger tools, let's say HubSpot, they do loads, but they're like $1 billion company. They publish a whole network of podcasts that all feed back the idea and mention HubSpot into them. But obviously we're a much smaller operation, so we're not massive. But that gives me the freedom to go and say what I want. I haven't got to do anything particularly corporate or worry about stepping on someone's toes or annoying someone in the organisation. If I screw up, it falls on me, and I'll take that.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you kind of just wanted to give podcasting a go at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people, when they're in that position, it'll be like, maybe I'll do fortnightly interview episode or one episode a month and see how it lands. And then maybe they'll continue, maybe they won't. It seems like you jumped right into it. And have you always been releasing 3 episodes a week?
Yeah, from day one.
Yeah.
I sat down and I thought, what am I going to do? And I wanted to do something different. And a lot of the SEO was an hour-long talking heads, and you were seeing the same kind of people being interviewed. So the same story was being repeated again and again. I just felt that there wasn't a lot being taught. There wasn't a lot to take away. There were some interesting stories, some quite motivational stories, and people saying how, they'd had great success doing stuff. But a lot of the time, there wasn't a lot of nuts and bolts. If you're wanting to learn about SEO, what are the nuts and bolts? Where do you start? What are little tips? When I first built the tool, there's one section of the tool which takes about 30 seconds to run. So rather than it just having the screen sat there for 30 seconds with a little thing running around, I wrote 100 quick SEO tips that display the tool's running every 10 seconds, a new one shows. And so over time, it does it randomly, over time there's 100. And I thought, I've got these 100 quick tips. I could start by basing podcast episodes on 1 or 2 of those tips, or some of them merge together. So it's like thinking short episodes, just a few minutes long, having a very high frequency so that I appear in the feed frequently. So that was one thing. I thought, that's different. And also, if it was just me, it means I didn't have to source guests. I could record when I wanted to record. I didn't have to schedule things. It meant I could just build a bank of pre-records up. So on the day when sometimes, you probably know yourself, some days you feel better about, you feel more inspired to talk than others. So when I got a day and I felt, right, that's good. The aim was to get a few episodes in the bank, and then I could store them up basically, and then just schedule them out over time. I just thought it was worth an experiment. I didn't know if it'd work. I didn't know if anyone would listen. But I went into it thinking, if no one listens, I'm not lost much. The only thing I needed to buy was a mic. That's the only thing I didn't have, was a decent mic. So I bought a Rode Podcaster 2. Mm-hmm. It was about £100 150 quid or something. It wasn't. I just Googled around to see what was a good, not stupidly expensive mic, but one that would be a reasonable price. And then I experimented with software, found Descript, which just makes podcast editing so easy. It's like editing a document. And yeah, I thought, well, okay, so all in, there's less than 200 quid to try and start, and I'll just see where it goes. And yeah, I've sort of really got into it. I really enjoy doing it. It's probably the thing I enjoy doing most compared to anything that I do work-wise. So
yeah, got to have that to keep you motivated. So how long do you spend a week on the whole podcasting process if you're doing 3 episodes?
When I first started, I think the first episode was about 8-9 minutes long. It took me the best part of a day to record because I was so nervous, so wanting to get it. I wouldn't say perfect because it was far from perfect, but I kept freezing. I kept jumbling over my words, because that was another problem, obviously, of working solo all the time, is that you don't spend a lot of time talking. So for many years I felt like I'd spent whole days not saying anything to anyone, and I got out of the habit of actually talking.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
But yeah, so the first few episodes, it was a learning curve and it took me time to get it right. But now I can do pretty much most episodes I can do in a roundabout. I literally just sit down and record, and most of them are done in one take, and it's the first take. Sometimes I've discovered the point that if I get to a point where I freeze, before I used to stop the recording, then wait while it all transcribes before I start again. But now I've realised actually it's just as easy with the script. You just say cut out the shorten word gaps. Mm-hmm. So now if I suddenly forget what I'm talking about, I just stop, gather my thoughts, and then start again. So you can do it all in one take if you just get used to the process. So now I can do them really quickly. The harder thing is obviously coming up with the ideas for the topics for every single one. That's where I'm constantly all week. If an idea comes to me, I'm listening to another podcast, or I've read something, or some news comes out, I'll just drop myself a quick email from my phone, podcast idea, and just a title. So now it's really quite quick, and I've automated the intro and the outro. I used to record that every single time and then overlay the music, and then I thought, well, why am I not just recording it once and then just dropping the files in? But these things just don't occur to you when you first start doing it. So yeah, so now if I've got some good ideas and I'm motivated and got something good to talk about, I can normally do 3 episodes in less than 3 hours. It can be slightly less. But I say I've just started this week recording some of the first interview episodes. They take a bit longer, obviously, because you've got to schedule a guest, and then when you're speaking with a guest, it's a little bit of a longer conversation and then a little bit more editing. So that is going to take me more time to sort of get used to having interviews and going through that process.
Yeah, wow, there's a lot of insight there. Like, I think maybe when people, when they see the short episodes, or they think about starting a podcast with those really short kind of episode formats, it seems like it wouldn't take long, but each individual episode, you've got to sort of produce it separately and write the show notes and upload it and schedule it and come up with a separate idea. I think some people can struggle coming up with an idea for a podcast once a week, let alone 3 times a week. Mm-hmm. Are there any other ways that you find out what people want, basically, what questions people are asking? Like, I know you've obviously got your tool, Keywords People Use. Is that something that you find useful to find out what to make episodes about?
Yeah, totally. I have used the tool itself for finding ideas. So I will put in SEO, or I might obviously put a more narrow seed keyword to find different topic areas people are asking questions about. Yeah, totally. It can come through that. But I think a lot of it is just, if you just always have like some way of writing down show ideas, and especially because it's short episodes and I'm only trying to get somewhere between 8 and 16 minutes. If I feel like I've gone over 16 minutes, it's generally I've gone on a bit long. If I'm under 8, I've probably not got a broad enough subject area. I've gone too tight maybe, but I don't beat myself up. I don't have an exact ideal time. But because they're so short, the ideas don't have to be huge, you know, and the research doesn't have to be huge. And I am basing a lot of it on, obviously, having been in the industry for 20 years, of just sort of putting that knowledge out. I also do things like not worrying too much about the sequencing. So my topics bounce around a lot. Yeah. Sometimes I have done sequences where I've had ones that do follow on from each other. When I did a sequence talking about the Google Webmaster Guidelines and the Google Rater Guidelines, because that's such a big document, I broke it down into sections and did that over about 10 episodes, I think it was. But generally a lot of the time it's literally just whatever is occurring to me at the moment, or whatever's bothering me, or whatever I've just got inspiration on is what I'll go for. So I don't try and overthink the podcast. I don't try and overthink each episode. If anything, it's quite raw, but people that enjoy listening to it, I think, enjoy the fact that it's quite raw and not too overproduced and not too slick. Like I said, I don't go through and edit out the ums and the ers. I kind of leave them in because it's just, I want it to be like you're just sitting with me over a coffee, or a beer, just having that conversation, and it being conversational rather than being like incredibly well produced like some of the podcasts are.
Yeah. I think it depends as well. Like if somebody's got a guest on and they just don't have much experience speaking on podcasts and every other word they're saying or ah, then it's an hour-long podcast, then it's something that you definitely need to focus on. But if you're just talking yourself and you know the topic you're talking about, then there's typically not going to be anything that's going to get in the way anyway. But you say not too slick. I mean, your audio quality is very good, and it's nice to, hear what mic. I was going to ask that actually, like what mic you're using, because if anyone's, looking to upgrade their audio quality, if you listen to SEO, it's not that hard. I think the audio sounds really good.
Oh, thank you.
Despite the fact that you say you're not spending too much time on it. Did you say it's the Rode Podcaster?
Yeah, Rode Podcaster 2, I think.
Yeah, it was £100.
I pay so little attention to what the tech is. I had to look it up before the podcast, what I actually bought. Yeah, Rode Podcaster 2.
Yeah.
And it's just in a cheap shock mount. I think there's things I could do better with the audio. Descript's quite good because you can help you out with the audio quite a bit. It has a feature called Studio Sound, and that can help with levels and things like that. So I found that quite useful.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that one came up because I know there are some articles out there, some blog posts that rank very highly, and they're suggesting mics that just aren't really suitable for a lot of people or just not amazing audio advice. So that's kind of something to look out for. But if we could switch gears a little bit, it's really great hearing about your podcast. And I think there's a lot people can learn from that. Ideas for episodes and how to come up with them and the different formats people use. But if we can talk about SEO now, I think this is something that a lot of podcasters have thought about when it comes to episode titles, what can get them to show up in Google when people search, or maybe they haven't thought about it, but they're starting to think about it now. And I know some podcasters, us as well, we put out a blog post on our website for every episode that has our show notes that typically focuses on a keyword that people are searching for in the hopes that it will show up on Google and then it will lead people to our podcast. You mentioned the whole basis around the podcast is that SEO isn't that hard. I'm sure a lot of people think that it is. What made you go down that route? Why would you say that SEO isn't that hard? And what do you see people wasting their time on that they think is really hard, but maybe it's something they don't even need to be bothering with at all?
Well, I say SEO is not that hard because there's a lot of people in the SEO industry who try and make it sound hard, because I think obviously it helps them sell services. If you're trying to charge for something, making it easy is not necessarily what you want to do. But fundamentally, I've been doing this for so many years and the principles don't change hugely. There's lots of small technical things that can matter, but it's just a matter of learning what they are. A lot of what you need to do is just have good content that is well presented, that's on a secure and fast server. That's it. Your website just needs to be fast, secure, have good content, have good internal linking. There's just basic things. And okay, I'm not going to go through the whole of SEO now, but there's no individual parts of it that are overly complicated by themselves. You don't need to be a web developer. You don't need to be a computer scientist. You don't need to be all these things that some people would lead you to believe. You can get very in-depth on the weeds and very enterprise level stuff where the fine margins can drive bigger results because they've got such huge levels of traffic. Then some of that can be complex, but it's still not hard. So I wanted to sort of demystify it and say to people, if you follow the basics, then a lot of the time you will start to see success. The key thing I always say to people is don't look for quick hacks or quick results. Anyone promising quick hacks and quick results is probably going to either lead you to nothing, or if it does lead somewhere, you're likely to get penalised. I, in the past, have done quick hacks, done things against Google's guidelines, and I talk about that in the podcast. And I got heavily penalised back in sort of 2012, 2013 time. And I changed my philosophy and went, right, now I'm not going to build for the short term anymore, I'm going to build for the long term. If you build for the long term with SEO, then it isn't that hard. It's just all about making sure your content's good, like I say, good, well presented, and in a clean and fast website. It's as simple as that. There's lots of stuff on the margins to make the difference up, but it doesn't have to be that hard.
Yeah, it sounds like Google is clever enough now that it is just a case of making great content then, rather than maybe back in the early 2000s, it was maybe more focused on these hacks and things that people could get away with more.
Yeah, it was easier to do things like buy links, and people do still sell links now, and some people will tell you to buy links, and it will work in the short term, but in the long run, you're going to be much more likely to have problems. What Google looks for much more for now is a thing called information gain. So it's about having something new to say. That's the great thing about podcasts, because podcasts are much more intimate, they're much more based around people's stories about things people have actually done. And that's where there is a much more likelihood of information gain. So if you're basing content upon what you've put in a podcast, AI is an issue. Lots of AI content out there, but the trouble with AI content is it's only an average of stuff that it's seen before. It never creates anything new. There's never any real information gain. Whereas people telling their stories, and which podcasting is, there is information gain there. There is something, even if the story is new, even if the example is new, it's new. There's an information gain there. Whereas AI can't really tell its story, because AI content doesn't have a story. It can only regurgitate other people's stories rather than having something new to share.
Very interesting. I guess that's why it's important that people are telling a story on their podcast. And if they do have a kind of long form interview podcast, like we touched upon briefly, how is that being linked back to value for the listener rather than someone's story or just sort of generic tips? But if you can combine those two things, it seems like SEO as a service is quite a popular service to provide for people. I'm sure you're very much aware of all the cold emails that people get and stuff, like claiming that they can do all these things, and presumably they're using, some of them I'm sure are legit and can help, and some of them are probably using these tricks and black hat techniques that you mentioned. How can people tell if they do want help with their SEO, getting their website and podcast ranking? How can people tell if somebody is sort of worth working with or worth listening to?
The first advice I'd give to people if you're looking for a service provider is, I think you need to be a little bit clued up first before you go out shopping. And the simplest thing to do is to go to Google and search for Google's Webmaster Guidelines. And that is just a few short, simple documents written by Google. It's designed for the lay audience. It's not, you have to be overly technical to read it. And that tells you the kind of things that Google does and doesn't like. And I'm not saying you should always follow completely Google's guidelines to the hilt. When you start pushing the guidelines, you need knowledge before you get there. But if you're looking for someone, familiarise yourself with those guidelines. It won't take you more than half an hour reading. You will then know some of the red flags to look out for if people come along and they're trying to sell you a service or tell you what they're going to do. That's the first thing I'd say to do. And then secondly, I would just ask for references, see who else they've worked with, ask for results. Who else are you working with? Can I talk to another customer? If someone's good and reputable, they will have other customers that will be happy to endorse them. And if not, that's another red flag. My whole philosophy around SEO, and that's one of the reasons doing the podcast, is I don't sell SEO services, so I don't do SEO for people. That's not what I do. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach people to fish, essentially, so that they can feed themselves when it comes to SEO. So even if you don't want to do the work yourself, if you have people working for you, if you've understood the basics and have some knowledge, you're much less likely to end up in a situation where something comes back to bite you, where someone does some work that causes you issues. So it's just having a little bit of base level knowledge. But I say in the first instance, the very best one to go to is just those Google Webmaster Guidelines. Familiarise yourself with those, and that should help you avoid sort of 95% of the red flag pitfalls that you just wouldn't know about otherwise. Because why would you know what Google does or doesn't like if you've never been to try? And if you familiarise yourselves with those, that's what I'd say.
Cool. Okay, so read Google's Webmaster Guidelines, listen to a few episodes of SEO is Not That Hard, and that will hopefully get you to a place where you can at least start implementing some of these things. For the listeners, where they are in this journey is going to be very different. Some podcasters might have started considering using search terms in their episode titles to help them get showing up on Google. Some might have started a blog and they're posting regular content on there. But it seems like there's a lot of content in your podcast that could help wherever they are, because like you say, it's not a serial podcast. You can go back like a year ago and still find something that might be a little bit more relevant to you.
Yeah, definitely. I try to be as evergreen as possible with the episodes, and I try to be as reasonably descriptive as possible with the titles. Titles is an interesting one though, because there's two schools of thought, isn't it, on the titles. One is be descriptive, get the keywords in, tell people what it's about, and there's another one that is like leave a cliffhanger in your title. And I've experimented a bit with both of them, and the cliffhanger ones can tend to get more of your subscribers, I think, to listen, whereas they're not great for discovery because a cliffhanger title necessarily doesn't give away what you're talking about. So I think there's always going to be a trade-off there between enticing your current subscriber base where you're in their feed to click to listen versus trying to pick up new people. I haven't quite sort of squared that circle myself yet.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, because we do show notes and title writing for clients, and we always go talk to the human first. Get the existing subscribers, nurture your existing listeners first. So write a title that you know is going to get them to click before. And then if we can squeeze in a keyword, then we will. But keeping people listening is the first thing to do. And then to finish off, if there's one thing that you wish you'd have known a year and a half ago before you started the podcast that would have made things a little bit easier for you, what would it be?
I think that probably I would have started earlier if I'd appreciated that just doing it improves you. So I think I'd obviously thought about podcasting because I've been so into podcasts for a long time. I always thought, I will be rubbish at it. And I'm not saying I'm good at it now. I'm better than I was when I started. But I think the fact is that everyone will be terrible when they first start. Everyone's worst episode is their first episode, but they improve over time, and that your audience is quite forgiving. I think that depending on what podcast you listen to, if you've only really listened to lots of really well-produced podcasts, really professional podcasts, you think they've all got to be like that. But actually, when you are doing, the more niche you're going, so obviously with SEO, it's quite niche. It's not for everybody. If you're going really niche, the people that want to learn about the subject will forgive a lot when it comes to production values and the quality of your speech. And especially because I've got quite a regional accent from the UK, these things don't matter as much as you probably think they do, and that there is an audience out there, I think, for every niche and for every podcaster. And just to be a little bit more bold and go for it.
Love it. And especially if you're producing 3 episodes a week, you're going to improve very quickly.
I hope anyway.
All right. Well, thanks, Ed. I think that'd be really useful for people in terms of listening to your podcast journey and how you have made your podcast unique in the crowd. And then also, of course, your SEO expertise. So do you mind just telling people briefly what keywordspeopleuse.com is exactly, if they didn't already understand that from our whole conversation, and just how it might be able to benefit them, just so if anyone wants to know more. And then also, obviously, people can go to SEO is Not That Hard on their favourite podcast platforms and learn more there.
Sure, yeah. So Keywords People Use, it's based around my philosophy of you create great content for people by answering their questions, not by delving into lots of statistics left, right and centre from other keyword tools will give you. This is all about finding the questions actual people ask online. And it mines places like Google, it mines Reddit, it mines Quora, it mines a whole bunch of places online to find the questions people are asking. And then it doesn't just do that. The next part is it then helps you group those questions, because you can find thousands of questions, but you're not going to create thousands of pieces of content. A lot of those questions will actually cluster together to create content that you will create content pieces around, whether it be a YouTube video, whether it be a written blog, whether it be a podcast. It helps you cluster them, find the questions that are related to each other so you create some content. And the third piece is, with SEO, the biggest bang for your buck a lot of the time is actually improving existing content. So we have a third piece of the tool which connects to your Google Search Console, which is an area, if you've got a website, Google will give you extra information about how people are finding your website. You can connect to Google Search Console and see what your content is actually ranking for and where you're getting visibility in Google, but not clicks, which means you're not ranking high enough. And we can then give suggestions on how to improve your content to make it rank better. So it's like a holistic approach to creating new content and improving existing content, and then coming back and re-improving. So it's like creating a flywheel for your content to boost that visibility and traffic, and hopefully, if you're monetizing, your revenue over time.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that links perfectly to podcasting, about answering people's questions. That's what's going to get people to click. So thank you for that. That's keywordspeopleuse.com. And thanks again, Ed. I really appreciate you spending the time with us today. And yeah, all the best with the podcast.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on. Loved it. So I hope you find that useful, interesting. Like I say, if you're thinking of starting a podcast, then I really strongly recommend the Podcasting Amplified podcast. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. If you're looking to get someone to help you with a podcast, then Joe has got loads of services that do that. And he's a really nice bloke, so I would recommend him to anybody. So until next time, keep optimizing, stay curious, and remember, SEO is not that hard when you understand the basics. Thanks for listening. It means a lot to me. This is where I get to remind you where you can connect with me and my SEO tools and services. You can find links to all the links I mentioned here in the show notes. Just remember, with all these places where I use my name, the Ed is spelled with 2 Ds. You can find me on LinkedIn and Blue Sky, just search for Edd Dawson on both. You can record a voice question to get answered on the podcast, the link is in the show notes. You can try our SEO intelligence platform, Keywords People Use, at keywordspeopleuse.com, where we can help you discover the questions and keywords people are asking online, cluster those questions and keywords into related groups so you know what content you need to build topical authority, and finally connect your Google Search Console account for your sites so we can crawl and understand your actual content, find what keywords you rank for, and then help you optimize and continually refine your content with targeted, personalized advice to keep your traffic growing. If you're interested in learning more about me personally or looking for dedicated consulting advice, then visit www.edddawson.com. Bye for now, and see you in the next episode of SEO is Not That Hard.